So, we start with extra help on demand. And today, I'd like to talk about the differences between and the similarities amongst quadratic formula and completing the square. So, first off,
Brendan Moses, please come to guidance. Brendan Moses.
we're probably going to be interrupted a bunch, so sorry. The quadratic formula itself says x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I do want you to remember it. However, on your regents, they will give it to you as well. And what you need to recall also about this formula is that the a is the number in front of the x squared, because the general form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now, in this case, a is going to be 1, b is going to be 3, and a little careful on c, it's negative 7. Now what I do is I take all of these values and I plug them into that formula. So x equals. Now this says the negative of b. b is 3, so this becomes negative 3 plus or minus the square root of n. Always use parentheses around the b, particularly if it's a negative. It doesn't really matter if it's positive, but by always using it, you'll never make the mistake. And then you just type it into your calculator exactly as written. b squared, which is 3 squared, minus 4 times a is 1 times c is negative 7, all over 2a. So x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of, and if you do this in your calculator, you're going to get 9 plus 28, which is 37, all over 2, oh, this should be times 1, because a was 1. 2 times 1 is 2. And that, folks, is my answer. Now, there's actually two answers here. One of the answers is the negative 3 plus, notice what I'm writing here, plus square root of 37. A way to write it would be this, over 2. And the other answer would be negative 3 minus the square root of 37 over 2. But rather than take the time to write out both of those, we just write it in as I did in the box, and it represents both answers. Now, I'm going to do the same exact question using completing the square. And when I do completing the square, there's one major difference. First off, I better get the same answer or something's really wrong. There's a major difference. You see, when we always want to look and see if we factor first, and I actually skipped over that step. I should not have. When I look at this equation, I looked and see, and so could I do AM on it? No, I couldn't. There's no two numbers that multiply out to negative 7 add up to 3. That's why I went to the quadratic formula. And just the fact that this wound up being an irrational number verifies that it was correct to go with the quadratic formula. Completing the square, we do something very different. In fact, you know what? I'm going to change this question slightly to make it easier for you. I'm going to make it plus 8x minus 7. Now, when we do completing the square, the first thing we do is get everything on the other side, okay? And then the catchphrase for completing the square, I hope you remember it from class, is half and square. When I say half, I mean half of the b being the number in front of the x, in this case the 8. So half of 8 is 4, and then I'm going to make it x plus 4 squared. The problem is that x squared plus 8x does not equal x plus 4 squared. You need a plus 16 here. And if you go back to the lesson on this, we'll derive why. I'm just showing you the technique how now. Add 16 there, and to keep it balanced, I have to add 16 to the other side. So that makes 23, and that gives me x plus 4 squared equals 23. So the next thing I'm going to do is square root both sides, and I get let's see here. I'm going to get x plus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 23. Then I minus 4 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 23. Give me just a second to look that over because I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. Half square, 27, and that is there. Good. The big difference between completing the square, notice with the quadratic formula, we keep it equal to 0. With completing the square, I want to add the 7 to both sides, and then I want to work with it that way. Okay? So you've been through an example. Why don't you try the next two on the page, and then I will give you the answers, and let's see if you have it down pat. Okay, so quadratic formula. A is the number in front of the x squared, B is the number afterwards, C is the number in front of the B, C is the number at the end. So x equals, now, the negative of B is negative 4, so the negative of negative 4 is positive 4. Plus or minus the square root of, I should make that a little longer, negative 4 squared. This is where it's really important to put it in parentheses because of the negative there. Minus 4 times 1 times negative 9, all over 2 times 1 is 2. So x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of. So 16 plus 36 is 52 over 2. And I'm going to stop for now. It is possible to simplify this square root of 52. However, we have not learned the technique for simplifying radicals. We'll learn it later in the year, come back to it, and we'll review this when we learn that technique for simplifying radicals. But for now, that is good enough. Now let's do the same exact question using completing the square. Plus 9 plus 9. X squared minus
The
4x
following students, please come to
equals 9.
guidance. Brandon,
Remember,
Moses,
the
Destiny,
key
Carla.
phrase here, half and square. So it's x minus 2 squared. Again, I can't emphasize enough, I don't have time right now to go back to the y of that, but if you do and you look in the videos, you'll see it. Plus 4, because negative 2 squared gives me the positive 4. Equals, make sure I add 4 to both sides, 13. Square root both sides. The square root of something squared is itself x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 13. Add 2 to both sides, and I get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 13. I just want to go back and emphasize something we did right here. When you square root something squared, they always undo each other. That's why you're just left with whatever was under the radical, x minus 2. Now, I just want you to know that when you learn how to simplify radical 52, you'll learn that it's 2 radical 13, and then that can be reduced. So they actually are the same answer. It's kind of like saying that 4/8, it does equal a half, but in between there's 2/4. 2/4 is kind of like the radical 52. It's not simplified all the way. Okay, so extra help on demand. If you're struggling with this, now you have resources to help you out.